You're here, which means that you've found Spirit Crumbs, leading you to your inner light worker. I will be sharing how these tiny little hints from the universe have led me to where I am today. I hope that by hearing my story and the stories of others, you'll pick up your own spirit crumbs along the way that will lead you to somewhere magical. Thanks for coming along for the journey. Let's see where it takes us. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Spirit Crumbs. I am your host, 𝗬cie𝗿𝗄𝗃, and I am an intuitive reader and energy healer. So today's episode is going to be probably a short one, and until yesterday, even till this morning, I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about. Usually I have an idea by Sunday or Monday, and I've had so much on my mind. But what came to me this morning was that it would probably be a good idea to talk about reading for yourself. Because a lot of what we talk about, or what I talk about, is how I work for others and how synchronicities show up. But a lot of those things show up when I do readings for myself. And I do them very differently than how I do readings for someone else, because I know for someone else, if it's coming through me, I just have to assume and trust that it's for them. But when we're doing a reading for ourselves, our ego steps in a lot more because we have a personal attachment to it. When it's for someone else, yes, we may care about them if you're doing a reading for someone you know, but it also is a lot easier to allow and trust that good things are going to come through for them. So we trust those things. And for me, I find that the only way I can do a reading for myself, which every morning I pull cards for myself, is to look at them first and feel what I'm getting from the cards. And then I always, still to this day, unless it's a card I've gotten a lot recently, I still look at the meaning in the book, because I find that I skim through it because most of them I know pretty well by now, but something different. Like there's been times when there is a card I pull from a deck I've had for a long time. And when I look at the description in the book, there's something that I don't remember ever reading before. Even some of these cards, there's a deck that I have that I've had for probably I would say at least 5 years, if not longer. And there's times when I'll pull a card that I haven't gotten for a while, or even one that I've gotten recently, and I swear I've never read part of the description. So that is part of the reason why I do that, because something different stands out to you every time. It's like when you watch a movie and you can watch it 4 or 5 times, and each time there's a part that you didn't quite catch the first time, because it depends on where your focus is. And it's the same thing with doing your cards. Wherever you're focused on, if there's something that you're really, really really focused on. So let's say there's a relationship that you really want to work out, then you're going to read the cards with that lens, that you're anticipating that that's what's going to come through. And sometimes that can make us really biased, because there are cards that have different layers of meanings. And sometimes we may try to tell ourselves that it's one particular meaning that we want to see. So I, for myself, use a combination of tarot and oracle cards, just because I find that oracle cards are great for getting a general sense of what's happening, or like giving me guidance. And then the tarot cards are a little bit more like to the point. And I use the Light Seers Tarot, and I use John Holland's Psychic Tarot. I kind of use those together. So I don't know if you've seen me do my Card Pull Friday videos, but I use a numerology deck and an angel deck for that. And I use like one angel card and one numerology card as one combined message. And I do the same with these as well. And then with my oracle cards, I pull one each from 4 different decks, and then see what similar themes come up. So it's kind of intense, but it's my way of getting to know my cards and making sure that I'm knowing their essence and if they're still resonating with me, but also seeing a situation in different ways. Because if I pull from the same deck and like only pull a few cards from the same deck every day, then I find that the messages, I tend to dismiss the messages more. Whereas if I pull a similar message from 2 out of 4 of the decks, or if all of them are matching up, then I tend to trust it more. And then as I'm doing this for myself and seeing, oh no, it's possible for more than the same card to come up multiple times, I realize that like that also builds my trust for when I'm doing readings for others. So sometimes, for example, for Card Pull Friday, I'll pull the same card a few weeks in a row or like within a couple of weeks of each other. And sometimes that'll kind of freak me out a little bit because I'll think, okay, is it going to sound like I'm just repeating myself? But what we have to keep in mind is, like I was saying before, our focus is where the meaning comes from sometimes, or what's happening. So even if I pull the same card 2 weeks later, it may have a very different meaning 2 weeks later based on the context of what's happening and what other cards are pulled, right? So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. And so for me, what I try to do is take a few deep breaths before I pull the cards as well. And then, like I said, I'll look at each card and see what I feel from it. So for example, I have one deck that I use, which I think I've talked about before, which is the 𝗤𝗏𝗱𝗏 Work Your Light deck. And the card that I get probably the most is Don't Dim to Fit In. And the question on the card is, how are you dimming your light in order to fit in? And this card, I barely have to look up the meaning because I've read it so many times. I still kind of do and just kind of like skim it while I'm thinking. But what I find the purpose of this card is when it comes up, I ask myself that question. And sometimes it's different things. So dimming your light to fit in could be, for example, if I was thinking about it for myself right now, I would say maybe I need to show up live more on my Instagram because I haven't been doing that a lot other than Card Pull Friday. And it's something that I do enjoy doing. So maybe now once in a while, when I'm doing my podcast, maybe I'll also show up live, for example. And so sometimes it's a matter of actually deciding what you're going to do with that information, because we can do readings till the cows come home and just like convince ourselves everything's fine because like positive cards are coming up. But I like to also remind myself of the action steps that I can take because I do this every day, which is a lot. Like it's not necessary. You can do it just when you feel called to. But I find that what keeps me going is choosing an action step from what I pull every day. And so, for example, today, I also pulled the Black Egg card from the Kim Krantz Animal Spirit deck. And that one is about the throat chakra and showing up with truth. And so for me, when that comes up, it's another sign that I should be sharing more and like putting more out there. So again, like I was saying before, 2 cards came up saying that, and I wouldn't have necessarily gotten 2 similar cards for meaning if I had pulled from only one deck. And then in the other deck, I pulled the 21 card again, which I think I talked about in another episode maybe, but it's in traditional tarot, it's the World. And so I pulled that card in the Lightseers Tarot, and I also pulled the 21 Universe card from the John Holland Psychic Tarot Oracle deck. And so for me, that's another repeated message. So it's something that I'm being told, like, yes, you're at the point where like it's time to reflect and celebrate how far I've come. And that is really in alignment because yesterday was 1 year since I started my Concrete and Crystals Instagram account. And I had a really fun night event that I did where people registered to be a part of it. And I did mini readings and I did an energy healing session. The readings were a lot longer than I intended. And I think that's partly because that's what people needed more from me at that time. But that card coming up now is really significant because I am in that phase right now. That's very relevant. Obviously, I do this every day, so my readings aren't necessarily like long-term forecasts. They're more like what I need to look at in this moment, and it keeps me very present when I do it on a daily basis, because like if I only do them once in a while, I tend to say like, oh, okay, this is coming up, and I'm like, I'll deal with it when it comes up. But when I'm seeing it today, and then if I actually have gotten these cards a couple times recently, especially the universe card. So I'm like, okay, this is something that I clearly haven't been listening to. I haven't been taking the time to celebrate and like look forward into like what is coming next. And then I got the Chariot, which I've been getting a lot, which is movement. And for this specific deck in the Lightseers Tarot, it's like one telling you to like, if you're going two different directions, to kind of like guide that energy into one thing and focus on it. And that's something that obviously I need to do. I have a lot of different things on the go all the time, but I'm getting to that point because I have decided to step back from a job that I've been in for a long time, that I honestly, it was a difficult decision because I do really believe in the organization, but it's just something that was not aligned anymore. And it ended up being really good timing for them as well, because they have just hired someone else in the department, and it's like a fresh start for them this way. And for me, that's a big step to take, but now getting this card, it's kind of a confirmation that yes, I'm meant to be right where I am right now. That's why I'm getting this celebration card. I made this decision. And also I'm channeling my energy into one thing right now. And then I'm just being open to other opportunities that come towards me. So just giving you an example of how I apply it to what's happening for me. And I try not to, like I say, oh, maybe this is for in the future, or maybe this is something that's like coming up, because it's what's happening today, right? And then what's interesting is I've talked a lot about how the Tower card comes up for me all the time, and for me it's not always like huge distraction. And as I'm sure you've listened to most of my podcast episodes this year, I've already had pretty much everything change, and now I literally have just ended the only other like kind of consistent thing that I've had this whole time. And so today I pulled it again, but in the Psychic Tarot deck, where it's called Disruption, and it's number 16, which is the number of the Tower, but it's also a 7, and the Chariot is a 7, and that's like one combined message. So this is telling me that by choosing to disrupt my patterns and to focus my energy in one direction is how I'm moving forward, because this is at the end of my reading. And it also reminds us not to have like limiting beliefs. So not to allow myself to get worried about what's coming up in the future, but to just be very focused on how I can rebuild. Because what I noticed today that I hadn't really thought about when I've pulled it previously, because previously I've been in more of the crumbling phase, is that it starts kind of by talking about rebuilding an area of your life in a more healthy way now with the lessons you've learned. And so for me, I read this card very differently than I usually do. And not unlike most people, I don't really get too worried when I see the Tower card, because it's kind of like a regular check-in with my guides. But I just wanted to say that like it goes to show you, even though like I said, I'm very familiar with this energy of this card, I still got a very different message today. And it was very aligned with the other card I pulled. And so that would be a tip that I would say if you're starting out pulling cards for yourself. I don't want to go too long on this because I feel like it's a fairly straightforward subject, but I would suggest if you have more than one deck, even if it's one tarot deck and one oracle deck, I would suggest pulling 3 cards from yourself from each and line them up so that they're on top of one another, and read in the columns as one message. So the first card from each is one message combined, and try to see what message is and have that intention when you're pulling the cards so that that's coming out in that format, and just see what comes up. I've suggested a couple people do this and they found it very helpful because it gives context to each of the cards. And that's why I read with the numerology and the angel cards together for other people, because it gives more context to each card. And even myself, as I'm reading, I'll be getting one stream of information, and then when the other card comes out for that row or that column, I am given more information. I'm like, oh, okay, this is more specific to the context. It narrows down your focus a little bit so that it's not so big. Because some of these cards, like the universe, like the celebration and like the world, like all these big things can be very just, we can tend to not know what to do with that. And that's why, like I said, I like to have another card paired with it so that I can see what it means for me at the time. And I think that that's just a really good way, if you're starting out to read for yourself, of getting a clear message and maybe starting to see each card in a new way and really read it differently. And like I said, there's no shame in using the book. I mean, I try to do, like I said, my own interpretation before I look at the book. And when I'm doing readings for others, I don't use the book. But when I was starting out, I definitely did. And I still do if it's somebody I know, especially because the same thing can happen where like, I know what I would like to see come up for them or like how I would want to read it for them. And so sometimes I still do. In a professional reading where I'm like being paid and there's an energy exchange, I don't, because I actually trust more in those situations for some reason. I know a lot of people it's the opposite and they get very like nervous around that. But I trust that if somebody is putting out some energy in order to get the information, I trust that then I'm going to be able to flow that information back to them in a very directed way. And so it's just something to think about when you're starting out. If you're doing readings for people you know and there's people around you, you can still try the same thing and try to see what it means for you when you pull it first, and then go to the book. And you may find that if you pull the same card for yourself and you pull it for someone else, what happens for me is it's so interesting, because as soon as I look at the meaning, I'll start talking about what I'm seeing and it'll still be relevant to them and they'll be resonating. But as soon as I look at the book, I'll usually see something that doesn't usually apply to me that applies to them. But I would love to hear how it goes for you if you do decide to pull from like 2 different decks, or maybe pull one card from 4 different decks if you have a lot like me. I know not everyone is as obsessed, so you may just have 1 or 2. Even with 1, just realizing that you can still do the same thing. You can look at it and then look at it in context of the other cards and try to see what it's telling you. So if you pull 3 cards, try to see what the overall message is, like what is common between the cards, or what is the steps that it's telling you to take. And always try to have an action step that you can take from these pieces of information. And so for me, it's just making sure that my foundation is really solid, because that's what the Tower card talks about. And I have another card that's a 4, which is about foundation and achievements. And so for me, it's another reminder to focus on what the foundation is and like what I'm building and the reason why I have gone through all of these stages and what these achievements mean to me and like what I'm carrying forward. And again, that goes into the Chariot, carrying step forward and moving forward with it. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I can't wait to see what comes up next week to share with you. As always, you can come onto Concrete and Crystals and see what's going on with me and my journey and what offerings I have. I've updated my offerings recently through the link in my bio, but I love to just see people showing up for Card Pull Friday and commenting on what's there already. So I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Spirit Crumbs. You can find me on Instagram for this podcast at Spirit Crumbs, or you can also find me at Concrete and Crystals for my own spiritual offerings and more tidbits about my own journey. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.